You know those days when everything goes according to plan? You wake up, drink your coffee, go to work, and even the traffic can't ruin your mood. I had one of those days until the evening. My name is Sofia. I'm an ordinary IT worker who spends her days in front of a monitor, deciphering code that sometimes feels like encrypted messages from another dimension. That day, I was working late. I had a project to finish, and the deadline was looming, as always. When I finally closed my laptop, the office was empty. Only the cleaning lady rustling her mop, somewhere in the distance. I stepped outside. It was already dark, the city lights were lit, and the air was filled with that special evening coolness that seems so invigorating after a sultry day. I decided to take a shortcut through the underground parking garage of my business center. I usually don't do that. It's always a bit gloomy and deserted there, but today I was so eager to get home that I thought, oh well, 10 minutes and I'll be home. The parking garage door closed behind me with a dull thud. I found myself in complete silence, broken only by the hum of a ventilation system somewhere. The air was thick, saturated with the smells of gasoline, rubber, and something else. Metallic, cold. Small debris crunched underfoot, and the yellowish light from the few lamps cast long, distorted shadows on the concrete walls. I walked, quickening my pace, feeling goosebumps run down my spine. I should have called a taxi, I scolded myself silently. You should always listen to your inner voice. But no, I decided to save 10 minutes. And then, just as I was almost to the exit onto my street, I heard sounds. At first, I thought it was just street noise, but no, they were muffled, heavy sounds, like someone methodically, without any malice, beating on wet sand, over and over, and a quiet, calm voice, so calm that it made me physically chill. Jin-ho said, in a calm, emotionless voice, "Tell your boss, there is only one king on this earth, and it is not him." I froze, pressed against the cold concrete column. My heart was pounding so hard I could practically hear it in my ears. Slowly, afraid to make even the slightest sound, I poked my head out from behind the shelter, and I saw him. He stood in the center of the parking lot under a dim light that cast harsh shadows on his face. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, the jacket draped neatly over the side mirror of a luxury black sedan. The sleeves of his white shirt were rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms. The skin on his knuckles was chafed, and his fingers were stained with something dark, almost black in the light. Blood. 3 people lay on the concrete around him, not moving. I felt my legs give way. A lump formed in my throat. Oh my God, flashed through my mind. This is a movie. This should be happening in a movie, not in my life, not on a normal Tuesday when I just wanted to go home. I backed away, trying to breathe as quietly as possible, and then I stepped on someone's forgotten glass perfume bottle. The crunch echoed throughout the parking lot, seemingly throughout the world. Everyone froze. The sounds of impact ceased. I felt every person in this space stare at me. Slowly, like in the scariest horror movie, they turned their heads. His eyes met mine. They were the color of dark chocolate, almost black, and completely empty. There was no anger in them, no irritation, not even curiosity, just ice. Ice that pierced me right through and paralyzed me. He said something sharp and abrupt in Korean to his 2 assistants, huge men in dark suits who stood at a distance. They instantly came to life and began quickly and silently loading the bodies of the prostrate people into the trunk of another car. They acted with frightening coordination, as if they did this every day. And he walked toward me. Slowly, his footsteps echoed in the deathly silence of the parking lot. Each step he took resounded in my temples. I couldn't move, couldn't make a sound. I simply stood and watched my death approach me. Thoughts raced at a maddening speed. Mom, my cat will go hungry. An unfinished report. I didn't even say goodbye. He stood so close I could smell him, expensive perfume with notes of sandalwood and something else. Something heavy, sweetish metallic. The scent of blood. He was a full head taller than me, and I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. Jin-ho said, quietly and clearly, "You didn't see anything." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact, a simple, indisputable fact, like the fact that the earth revolves around the sun. My brain, overloaded with fear, produced the most idiotic, most absurd reaction. Sarcasm, a defense mechanism that has always saved me. I said, and my voice sounded hoarse and uncertain, "Saw? I already forgot my name. What difference does it make what I saw there? The corners of his perfect, slightly cruel lips twitched a millimeter. Not a smile. More like a slight, barely perceptible expression of surprise, as if he'd seen a talking parrot. But the expression immediately vanished, replaced by his familiar mask of indifference. Jin-ho said, in the same even tone, "Go home, forget this evening like a bad dream." All I could do was nod like a puppet. I turned around, ready to run, my feet sagging beneath me, my only aim being the light of the streetlights beyond the exit door. But his voice, still quiet and inexorable, stopped me again. Jin-ho said, and these words sounded like a final sentence, "Wait for my call." And he turned and walked back to his car, as if he'd just been discussing the weather with me. I stood there for a few more seconds, unable to move, and then I broke into a run. I ran without looking back, bursting out into the street and taking a deep breath of the cold night air, which tasted like the sweetest thing I'd ever inhaled. I ran to my apartment, slammed the door, and leaned my back against it, shaking. My heart was pounding. I went to the window and looked out. Nothing. No black sedans, no Korean Mafia. It was just my imagination, I tried to convince myself. I'm tired. I'm nervous. My brain is hallucinating. But I knew it wasn't so. I felt his icy gaze on me. I remembered the smell of his perfume and blood. I heard the crunch of glass under my foot. And most importantly, I remembered his last words. Wait for my call. What the hell did he mean? And how would he call if I didn't give him my number? And what would happen when he calls? I remained standing by the window, peering into the night beyond the glass, with only one question that would haunt me every second from now on. What awaits me when the phone rings? The next 48 hours became one continuous waking nightmare. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me flinch. The creaking of the elevator in the building seemed like a harbinger of approaching danger, and the ringing of the phone like a death sentence. I tried to convince myself that everything that had happened in the underground parking garage was just a hallucination, born of fatigue and stress. But the memories were all too real. Jin-ho's cold gaze, the scent of his blood-tinged perfume, the crunch of glass under my feet. On the third day, I finally decided to go back to work. I thought the routine and familiar office environment would help me recover. I sat in front of the monitor, trying to concentrate on the code, but the letters were blurring before my eyes. His words kept echoing in my head. Wait for my call. My colleagues noticed my condition. Sophie, are you okay? Asked Lena, my office neighbor. You look like you've seen a ghost. I forced myself to smile. I just didn't get enough sleep. I was finishing that project yesterday. Lying wasn't easy for me. I'd always prided myself on my honesty, but how could I tell the truth? Sorry, I saw a Korean Mafia boss torturing people in the parking lot, and now I'm waiting for him to call. It sounded like the ramblings of a madwoman. Suddenly, my phone vibrated, an unfamiliar number. My heart sank. My hand shook as I picked up the phone. Hello? The voice sounded hoarse and uncertain. That same voice. Low, calm, without a single emotion. He spoke slowly, drawing out the words as if enjoying my fear. Come out to the entrance, black sedan. You have 3 minutes. I felt goosebumps run down my spine. My throat went dry. What if I call the police? I tried to bluff, though my voice was trembling treacherously. There was silence on the other side, so deep and heavy that I felt like I was speaking to the abyss. When he finally spoke, his voice was even quieter, but all the more menacing. Then they'll have to deal with me. And you don't want that. 3 minutes, Sofia. He said my name with such intonation, as if it were not just a name, but a code word, a sentence. He knew. Of course he knew. In these 2 days, he learned everything about me. I ran to the window and pulled back the blinds. Downstairs by the entrance sat that same black sedan. It looked like a predator lurking in my calm, ordinary world. My thoughts raced. Don't come out. Hide in the bathroom. Call the police. But another stronger voice whispered, what if he comes up here? What then? What will happen to your neighbors? With trembling hands, I pulled on my jacket, grabbed my bag, and ran out of the apartment. The elevator moved agonizingly slowly. Every second seemed like an eternity. When the doors opened, I saw the sedan parked right outside the entrance, the back door ajar. I peered inside. He was alone, behind the wheel. His profile was illuminated by the dim light from the dashboard. "What, have they laid off the hired drivers?" I blurted out my signature sarcastic line, even though my insides were clenched with fear. He glanced at me briefly through the rearview mirror. This time, I saw more than just ice in his eyes. There was weariness there, a deep, weary weariness that even his iron composure couldn't hide. "You can't trust anyone these days," he said, and I caught a hint of something else in his voice. Something like disappointment. The car pulled away. We drove in complete silence. I stared out the window at the flickering city lights, trying to guess where they were taking me. To be executed? To remove a witness? But then why call and warn them? I noticed he was constantly checking his rearview mirrors. His fingers were nervously tapping the steering wheel. Something was wrong. Suddenly, he abruptly turned off the busy street into a dark, poorly lit alley. The car skidded. "Hey!" I cried, grabbing the door handle. "Where are we going?" His answer was sharp and short. "Bend over." His hand, strong and heavy, landed on the back of my head, pinning me to the leather seat. The next second, the driver's side window shattered into 1,000 pieces with a clang. There was a bang, a muffled shot. A terrified groan escaped my chest. I lay pinned to the seat, not daring to move. I heard him take a pistol from under his jacket with his left hand and, barely aiming, fire 2 short shots into the darkness outside the window. A deafening silence fell. He removed his hand. I rose slowly, afraid to move. He was breathing a little faster than usual. His perfectly styled hair was now slightly tousled. A thin trickle of blood from a cut from a piece of shrapnel ran down his perfectly shaven chin. "Are you hurt?" His voice was as even as if he were asking about the weather. No," I whispered. "And you?" He glanced at his left hand, still clutching the pistol. A rather large shard of glass was sticking out, and blood was seeping copiously onto the snow-white fabric of his shirt. "Nonsense," he snapped. But I couldn't just sit idly by anymore. Something shifted within me. Fear gave way to a strange calm. Perhaps it was the adrenaline rush, or perhaps my mother's nursing instincts kicked in. "Let me see," I said, and surprised myself at my own determination. He raised an eyebrow in surprise, but released his grip. The gun lay on the center console. I reached for his hand. My fingers trembled, but I tried to act with precision. "This needs to be treated. I have some antiseptic wipes and a Band-Aid in my bag." I stuck my hand in my bag and started frantically searching for my first aid kit. You know, just in case. A regular woman's purse. It's like Mary Poppins' bag. I awkwardly grabbed the shard and pulled it out. He didn't even wince. He just looked at me. Then I opened the package of wipes and began wiping away the blood. Suddenly, his free hand, cold from the night air, touched my chin. He gently but firmly forced me to look up at him. "You're strange. You should be afraid of me. Run from me," he said, and for the first time, a note of genuine curiosity appeared in his voice. "I'm scared," I admitted honestly, my voice still shaking. "But you're about to bleed to death in your car, which costs my annual salary, and that, is an unaffordable luxury. To ruin such an interior." And he smiled. For the first time. It wasn't just a flex of his muscles. It was a genuine, albeit brief, smile. It melted the ice in his eyes for a moment and made him incredibly attractive. In that moment, something clicked between us. Something dangerous and inevitable. "My name is Jin-ho," he said, starting the car. The car pulled away smoothly, leaving behind the alley, shattered glass, and a silence in which there were no longer any gunshots. But my heart continued to pound wildly. Now, not only from fear. He drove silently, his profile illuminated by the neon city lights. I watched him furtively, his strong hands on the wheel, his concentrated expression. Who was he? Why had they tried to kill him? And most importantly, what was he going to do with me now? We pulled up to a nondescript building on the outskirts of town. He turned off the engine and turned to face me. "You need to stay here for a few days. This is a safe place." "What about my job? My apartment? My cat?" I bombarded him with questions. "Your cat will be taken care of," he replied. "As for work, consider it an unscheduled vacation." He got out of the car and opened the door for me. We stood in front of an inconspicuous door, beyond which I knew the unknown awaited me. "Why?" I asked, looking him straight in the eyes. Why don't you let me go? Why don't you get rid of me if I'm so dangerous? He looked at me carefully, and something complex flashed in his eyes, something I couldn't understand. Because you saw nothing, he said, the steely edge returning to his voice. But now you see too much. He opened the door and gestured for me to enter. I stepped into the unknown, knowing there was no turning back. Only one question remained. What awaited me behind that door? And why had Jin-ho, a cold and calculating mafioso, decided to spare my life? The door closed behind us with a dull click, audible in the complete silence. I stood in the small, hallway-like space, trying to take in my surroundings. The air was stale and smelled of dust, with a hint of old wood and something else, chemical, like a hospital. Jin-ho ran his hand along the wall, feeling for the light switch. A dim light came on, illuminating the austere surroundings. Before me lay a small living room with minimal furniture, a simple sofa, an armchair, a table, and a television. No personal belongings, photographs, or knickknacks. It was as if no one had ever lived here. A safe place flashed through my mind. It looked like a place where they hide or keep prisoners. We have everything we need here, his voice rang out loudly in the silence. There's food in the fridge, water. Don't open the curtains. I walked slowly to the center of the room, feeling the hard carpet beneath my feet. My body was still shaking from adrenaline. My hands were cold. For how long? I asked, turning to him. He took off his jacket and carefully hung it over the back of a chair. His white shirt was stained with blood, and a bullet hole gaped in his sleeve, framed by a crimson stain. Until I sort out some issues, he answered evasively, unbuttoning his cuff and rolling up his sleeve to examine the wound. The bullet only grazed the muscle, leaving a shallow but bleeding groove. He was right. It was nothing serious, but it looked terrifying. You need to treat that, I said, pointing to his hand. With real antiseptic, not wet wipes. He nodded and headed for the bathroom. I followed him, feeling awkward in this strange role as a nurse for a mafioso. The bathroom was as bland as the living room. White walls, standard fixtures, no sign of life. Jin-ho opened the first aid kit and pulled out hydrogen peroxide, bandages, and adhesive tape. Let me, I offered, taking the bottle from him. He looked at me in surprise but didn't resist. I wet a cotton swab and gently touched his wound. He flinched sharply but didn't make a sound. Sorry, I muttered. Nothing, he replied, looking at me with curiosity. You know how to do it. My mother is a nurse. She taught me the basics, just in case. I never thought it would come in handy in such circumstances. I treated the wound, trying not to cause him any unnecessary pain. It was strange to stand so close to him, this dangerous man, and feel the warmth of his skin. See the muscles in his forearm tense with every touch. When I finished and covered the wound with a bandage, he looked at his hand, then at me. Thank you, he said, and there was genuine gratitude in his voice. You're welcome, I replied, taking a step back. It's just, why? Why did you bring me here? Why didn't you let me go? He sighed heavily and leaned against the doorframe. I saw the same weariness in his eyes that I had seen in the car. You witnessed an attack on me. My enemies now know of your existence. If I had left you alone, they would have found you and used you against me. So what? Am I your prisoner? My voice trembled. You're under protection, he corrected, until the situation stabilizes. He walked back into the living room, and I followed him, feeling panic rising. I was trapped with a handsome, dangerous man whose world was filled with violence and death. I need to call work and let them know, I began. No, he snapped. No calls, no contact with the outside world. That's rule number 1. But my friends, my family, they will worry. Your work has already sent you a notice about an urgent business trip. Your friends and family will receive messages from you letting them know you're busy with an urgent project and will contact them later. I felt a shiver run down my spine. He had thought of everything, every detail. You have no right, I began, but he turned sharply to me and a fire flashed in his eyes. In my world, only the strong have rights, Sofia. And right now, your strength lies in your obedience. It's the only thing that guarantees your safety. He walked to the window, pulled the curtains aside, and looked out. His profile was tense. Who are these people? Who attacked you? I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away, continuing to look out the window. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and thoughtful. In the business I'm in, there are always those who want to take your place. Sometimes they're former partners. Sometimes they're new players. Today's attack, it's a message. A message? I asked again. They tried to kill you. No. Jin-ho shook his head. If they wanted to kill me, they would have tried harder. It was a show of force. A warning. He let go of the curtain and turned to face me, his face an impenetrable mask once more. You don't need to know the details. The less you know, the safer you are. But I'm already in this, aren't I? I said with a bitter smile. From the moment I stepped on that stupid bottle in the parking lot? The corners of his lips twitched. Yes, he agreed. From that very moment. He walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator and took out a bottle of water. You need to rest. Tomorrow will be a difficult day. Why? What will happen tomorrow? Tomorrow we'll start preparing, he replied, taking a sip from the bottle. For what might happen? He pointed to a door at the end of the corridor. Your room is there. Try to get some sleep. I looked at the indicated door, then at him. This man, Jin-ho, was an enigma. On the one hand, he was a cold, calculating mafioso, capable of violence. On the other, he had just saved my life, allowed me to treat his wound, and now he was offering me rest. And you? I asked. I need to make a few calls, make sure everything is under control. I nodded and headed towards my room. At the threshold, I stopped and turned around. Jin-ho? Yes? Thank you for not leaving me there in the alley. He looked at me for a few seconds, his face illuminated by the dim light of the chandelier. Sleep well, Sofia. I walked into the room and closed the door behind me. The room was as featureless as the rest of the apartment. A simple bed, a nightstand, a closet. I sat down on the bed and covered my face with my hands. Everything that was happening seemed unreal. Just a few days ago, my biggest problem had been a work deadline. And now I was sitting in a Mafia safe house, hiding from unknown enemies. I listened to the sounds outside the door. I could hear Jin-ho talking on the phone in Korean. His voice was quiet but commanding. He was giving orders. I suddenly realized how tired I was. Emotional exhaustion overcame fear and uncertainty. I took off my shoes and lay down on the bed, fully dressed. My thoughts returned to Jin-ho. Who was he really? A criminal? A murderer? Or something more? Why did he save me? Why did he care about my safety? The last thing I remembered before falling into a restless sleep was the sound of his voice outside the door, both soothing and alarming. And one question kept swirling in my head. What did he mean by, prepare for what might happen? What exactly was he planning to prepare me for? I woke up to a sound I couldn't immediately identify. A muffled, rhythmic knocking. It took a few seconds to realize it was someone knocking on wood. Quietly, but insistently, sunlight filtered through the cracks in the thick curtains, casting narrow stripes across the floor. I lay motionless, listening to the strange sound, trying to remember where I was. An ordinary bedroom. Impersonal furniture. Then it all came back to me. The parking lot, the shootout, Jin-ho. The knocking stopped. I slowly rose from the bed, straightened my wrinkled sweater, and carefully opened the door. The smell of coffee hit my nose. Thick, rich, completely unlike the invigorating drink I drank every morning in my past life. Jin-ho stood in the kitchen with his back to me. He wore simple black pants and a gray t-shirt that hugged his muscular shoulders. He held a knife in his hand, not a large one, but with a terrifyingly sharp blade, which he methodically stabbed into the wooden cutting board. A cup of steaming coffee sat nearby. You're not sleeping, he said without turning around. How did he know? I didn't make a sound. Yes, what are you doing? He turned and I saw his face, still closed. But this morning there was a new determination in his eyes. I'm learning to focus, he said, lifting the knife, the blade glinting in the light from the curtain. When you focus on one movement, everything else ceases to exist. Fear, doubt, they disappear. It sounds like Buddhist meditation, only with a bladed weapon, I remarked, moving closer. The corner of his mouth twitched. Something like that. Do you want some coffee? He poured me a cup, and I accepted it, our fingers brushing briefly. His hands were covered with small scars, thin white lines on his dark skin. Thank you, I whispered, taking a sip. The coffee was strong and bitter, without sugar or milk, just like its owner. We stood in silence, sipping coffee. It was strange, this mundane scene in such unusual circumstances. Just a few meters away, a dangerous criminal world could be raging, and here it smelled of coffee and wood. You said we'd start preparing today, I reminded her, setting the cup down on the table. For what exactly? Jin-ho put down his knife and looked at me carefully. His gaze was heavy, appraising. Because you could find yourself in a situation where your life will depend on your actions. And, perhaps, mine. He walked into the living room and pulled a small black briefcase from under the sofa. He placed it on the table and opened it. Inside, on black velvet, lay a compact pistol, matte black without a single glare. I took a step back. No, I won't touch it. You won't need to use it, he said calmly, but you need to know how it works. How to check if it's loaded, how to remove the safety, how to reload. I don't want to know, my voice trembled. I don't want to have anything to do with this world, Jin-ho sighed. There was no irritation in his gaze, only understanding. Sofia, you've already been involved in this. From the moment you witnessed it, ignoring it won't make you safer. He picked up the pistol and, with a swift, practiced movement, disassembled it. The metal parts fell onto the velvet with a soft thud. Look, he said, this isn't a weapon of death. It's a survival tool, like a fire extinguisher or a first aid kit. You hope you'll never need it, but you need to know how to use it. I slowly approached the table, looking at the disassembled pistol. It looked less threatening as a collection of parts, just bits of metal, springs, screws. Why? I whispered. Why are you showing me this? Jin-ho looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something elusive, a shadow of that vulnerability that had flashed yesterday. Because in my world, second chances are rare, and if something happens to me, you'll need to know how to defend yourself. His words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. If something happens to me... The phrase sounded like an omen. He spent the next 2 hours explaining the gun's mechanics. He made me take it apart and put it back together with my eyes closed until my fingers memorized every detail. He talked about the types of ammunition, the range, and how to hold the gun properly so the recoil wouldn't knock it out of my hands. Now the most important thing, he said as I reassembled the pistol once again. When not to shoot. I looked up at him. If there's even the slightest chance to solve a problem without weapons, use them. Run, hide, negotiate. Weapons are the last resort when all other options have been exhausted. Is this your rule? I asked. It's the survivor's rule, he corrected. We sat on the floor, surrounded by gun parts, and suddenly the absurdity of the situation hit me. Just a week ago, I was an office worker whose biggest danger was spilling coffee on my keyboard. Now I was sitting on the floor with a crime boss learning how to handle a gun. Tell me about yourself, I asked unexpectedly. The real you. Not who you are now, but who you were. Before. Jin-ho froze, his face unreadable. That person no longer exists. We all come from somewhere, I insisted. We all have a past. He was silent for so long that I thought he'd ignore my question. But then he spoke quietly, staring off into space. I grew up in Busan, by the sea. My father was a fisherman. He taught me to read the weather by the clouds and the waves. He paused, and a shadow of something warm, long forgotten, flickered in his eyes. That was a long time ago. What happened? I asked cautiously. His face became stony again. Life. He stood up abruptly. The lesson is over for today. He began to assemble the gun's parts, his movements becoming sharp and precise again. The wall was erected again. But the moment he spoke of the sea, I saw not a mafioso, but a boy from the shores of Busan. And this discovery was more terrifying than any weapon, the understanding that even the coldest person harbors a story. Tomorrow, he said, closing the briefcase, we'll talk about how to behave if you're taken hostage. He went to his room, leaving me alone with thoughts swirling in my head like fallen leaves in the wind. Who was this man really? And what else was hidden behind his icy calm? But the most important question that haunted me was, why, after getting to know him a little better, did I feel not fear, but something else, something dangerous and forbidden? A week passed. 7 days that turned my understanding of reality upside down. I learned how to disassemble and reassemble 3 types of firearms, how to detect surveillance, and where the weak points on the human body were. But the strangest thing was how my feelings for Jin-ho had changed. Last night we moved into a new place, this time a spacious apartment with panoramic windows hidden behind electronic curtains. This morning, I woke up to the smell of fried rice and vegetables. I went into the kitchen and froze in the doorway. Jin-ho stood at the stove. He wore simple sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair slightly tousled. He stirred the food in the pan, and at that moment, he looked ordinary. Dangerous, yes, but an ordinary man cooking breakfast. I didn't know Mafia bosses could cook, I said, moving closer. He didn't turn around, but I saw the muscles in his back tense. When I was a kid, I had to cook for my little sister when my parents were working. His voice was unusually quiet. That's the only good memory I have from that time. He placed the food on 2 plates and placed one in front of me. We sat at the table. Sunlight filtered through the cracks in the curtains, illuminating his face. For the first time, I noticed traces of fatigue around his eyes. "Today is our last day here," he said, tasting the food. "Tomorrow we'll move to another place." "Are we going to be moving from place to place forever?" I asked, putting down my fork. "Until I find whoever was behind the attack." He looked at me. "And until I figure out what to do with you." His words hung in the air. What to do with you. As if I were a thing, a problem to be solved. "Maybe you'll just let me go," I whispered. "I promise you I won't tell anyone." He shook his head, and I saw something like regret in his eyes. "You don't understand. Even if I let you go, they'll find you. They'll use you against me. There's no room for trust in my world, Sofia. There are only guarantees." "Am I your guarantee?" My voice trembled with resentment. "You are an involuntary witness and my responsibility." After breakfast, he suddenly suggested, "Do you want to see something real?" He led me to the window and pressed a button on the remote. The curtains slowly parted, revealing a view of the city spread out below. We were somewhere downtown, on a high floor. The people below looked like ants, the cars like toys. "Look," he said, standing nearby. "Down there, life is ordinary. People go to work, meet with friends, make plans. They don't know that another world exists, a world that lies in the shadow of their familiar reality." "Your world," I said quietly. "My world," he confirmed. "A world where the strongest survives. Where every decision can cost lives. Where you can trust no one." "And you never wanted to get out of it?" I asked, looking at his reflection in the glass. He smiled bitterly. "This isn't a hotel you can check out of. You either stay in the game or you lose. Forever." Suddenly his phone beeped softly. He glanced at the screen, his face tense. "Get dressed. We're leaving. Now." "What's happened?" "They found us." His voice became sharp, just like I'd heard it the first time we met. "We have 10 minutes." We quickly packed our things. Or rather, he packed 2 ready-made backpacks, which he always kept ready. I noticed him holster his pistol and attach it to his belt. "Remember what I taught you," he said, helping me put on my backpack. "If anything happens, run. Don't look back. Got it?" "And you?" I asked, feeling my heart pounding wildly. "I'll take care of myself. Your job is to survive." We walked out into the underground garage where another car was waiting for us. Not a luxury sedan, but a regular SUV. Jin-ho quickly inspected it, checking the underbody with a long-handled mirror. "Sit down," he ordered. We pulled out of the garage, and he immediately began performing complex maneuvers. Turns, U-turns, lane changes. His eyes constantly monitored the mirrors. "2 cars behind," he said quietly. "Buckle up." I looked in the mirror and saw 2 dark sedans following us closely. "Is it them?" I whispered. He nodded, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. "Hold on tight." He abruptly turned into a narrow alley, then again, trying to lose his tail. But the pursuing cars didn't let up. Suddenly, a 3rd car pulled out of a nearby alley, blocking our path. Jin-ho braked sharply. "Get out!" he shouted, unbuckling his belt. "Run to that store over there." But it was too late. Armed men emerged from the cars. There were at least 8 of them. Jin-ho pulled out a pistol. "Stay in the car," he ordered. Don't stick your head out. I saw him come out, stand in front of the car door, protecting me. I heard him speak to them in Korean. His voice was cold and commanding, but I caught something new in it. Tension. One of the men stepped forward. He was older than the others, with scars on his face and cold eyes. He said something, and I heard my name. They knew who I was. Jin-ho replied sharply, his hand holding the gun unwavering. But I saw him standing there, his body turned toward me, shielding me from danger. In that moment, I realized something important. He truly was protecting me. Not as a treasure or a guarantee, but as a person. Suddenly, shots rang out. But not from the pursuers' guns, from the rooftops. 2 of the attackers fell. A firefight ensued. Jin-ho opened the door and pushed me back into the car. "These are my people," he said quickly. "But we have to go. Now." He got behind the wheel, turned around, and backed up while his men provided covering fire. We burst out of the alley and sped away. A few minutes later, we were already driving along the highway, merging with the traffic. Jin-ho was silent, his fingers still gripping the steering wheel. You could have left me there," I said quietly. "That would have solved your problems." He looked at me, and there was something elusive in his eyes. "No," he answered simply. "I couldn't." We drove toward the sunset, and I realized I didn't understand anything. Who was this man? Why was he risking himself for me? And most importantly, why, seeing his willingness to protect me with his own life, did I feel not relief, but growing fear? But not fear for my life, but fear from the realization that the line between the enemy and the one I was beginning to trust was becoming increasingly blurred. We drove all night. Jin-ho was silent, his face lit only by the dim light from the dashboard. I sat, wrapped in the blanket he'd pulled from the trunk, watching the lights fade out the window. After the shootout, a strange silence had fallen over the city, not calm, but tense, as if before a storm. He turned off the highway onto a country road, and soon the outlines of an old 2-story house hidden behind tall trees appeared in the darkness. "Where are we?" I asked when he turned off the engine. "A safe place," he answered, evasively as usual. "It belonged to my family. No one knows about it." We walked inside. The house smelled of old wood, dust, and something else. Sadness, perhaps. Jin-ho lit a kerosene lamp, and in its warm light I saw a modest but cozy atmosphere. Wooden furniture, a worn carpet, photographs on the mantel. "Whose house is this?" I asked, looking at the yellowed photographs. He walked over to the fireplace and picked up one of the photographs. It showed a young Korean woman with kind eyes and a girl of about 10. "My mother," he said quietly. "She died 5 years ago." There was pain in his voice, real pain, not hidden behind a mask of indifference. I'd never heard him speak like that. "And the girl?" I asked cautiously. "My sister." He put the photograph back. "She lives in Canada. She doesn't know what I do. She thinks I'm a businessman." He went into the kitchen and started making tea. I remained standing by the fireplace, looking at other photos. There's Jin-ho as a teenager, already serious, but still without that icy mask. There he is with his sister, both laughing. Who turned this smiling boy into a cold mafioso? "Why did you show me this place?" I asked when he returned with 2 cups of tea. He placed the cups on the table and sat down in a chair. His face looked tired and human in the lamplight. "Because you deserve the truth," he said, looking into the flames in the fireplace. "And because perhaps tomorrow there will be no one left to tell it to?" His words hung in the darkness, heavy and ominous. "What's going on, Jin-ho? Who are these people? Why are they so persistent in pursuing you?" He took a sip of tea, his fingers gripping the cup so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "This is revenge," he said quietly, "on the man I once considered a brother, Lee Min-ho. We started together, building an empire, but he wanted more. He decided there could only be one leader." "And what happened?" I whispered. "I should have killed him." Jin-ho's voice grew lifeless. But I couldn't. At the last moment, I remembered how he saved my life years ago. I let him go, and that was the biggest mistake of my life. He looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw not only cold rage, but also pain and regret. Now he's back, and he won't stop until he kills me, and everyone I care about. "Including me," I said quietly. He nodded. Especially you. Because you've become a weakness for me. The air between us thickened. His words hung in the silence, broken only by the crackling of the logs in the fireplace. What does this mean? I whispered. He stood up and walked to the window, pulled back the curtain, and looked out into the night. It means I've broken the first rule of my world. Don't let anyone get close. Don't let anyone become important. I stood up and walked over to him. In the dark glass, I saw our reflections. His tall, tense figure and mine, so small next to him. What if I don't want to be just weakness? I said, looking at his reflection. What if I want to be a choice? He turned around abruptly, his eyes glowing in the dim light. You don't understand what you're talking about. My world will destroy you. I will destroy you. Or maybe you'll save me, I whispered, taking a step forward. Like you did in that alley. Like you've saved me every day since then. We stood so close that I could feel the warmth of his body, hear his breathing. Tension hung in the air, thick as honey. Sofia, he said, and my name on his lips sounded like both a prayer and a curse. I'm not a hero. I'm a monster who takes what he wants, and I want you, but it will kill us both. Then maybe it's better to die alive than to exist as a shadow, I said, raising my hand and touching his face. He flinched at my touch, as if he'd been electrocuted. His hand came up and covered mine, pressing it to his cheek. You don't know what you're asking for, he whispered. You don't know what I can endure, I replied. At that moment, the sound of an engine came from outside. One, then a second, a third. Jin-ho instantly transformed. His eyes became cold and collected again. He stepped back from me, and the mask fell back onto his face. They found us, he said quietly. Go to the basement. There's a secret exit there. And you? My voice trembled. I'll hold them off. He was already checking his pistol. Remember the route I showed you. When you get to the city, you'll find a woman named Min. Tell her I sent you. I won't leave you, I said, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. He turned sharply towards me, and a strange fire burned in his eyes, rage and tenderness at the same time. You have to, because if you stay, I'll protect you instead of fighting, and we'll both die. Footsteps were heard outside, the crunch of gravel underfoot. There were many of them. Jin-ho pushed me towards the hatch in the floor. Go, now. I looked at him one last time, tall, proud, ready to meet his destiny, and I realized I couldn't leave him, not after what had just happened between us. No, I said firmly. I'm staying. His eyes widened in surprise, then anger flared in them. Silly girl. But the door burst open, and armed men rushed into the house. And the moment I saw the face of their leader, the cold, merciless face of Lee Min-ho, I realized our choice had just been made for us. Only one question remained. Whose last night would this be? Ours or theirs? The moment the door swung open is forever etched in my memory. Not the sound, not the image, but the feeling. An icy wave of fear that flooded everything inside. Lee Min-ho stood at the threshold, his smile more terrifying than any weapon. He was thin, with piercing eyes that calculated our every step. Brother, he said, drawing out the word. How many years, how many winters? And who is this you have? His gaze slid over me, causing goosebumps to rise up my spine. Jin-ho stepped forward, shielding me with his body. His back was tense, like a panther about to pounce. This isn't her war, Min-ho. Let her go. Oh, but now it's her war, too. Lee entered the room, his men filling the space. There were at least 10 of them. Since she's become your weak point. I stood behind Jin-ho, feeling my knees tremble. My throat was dry. Part of me screamed, "Run! Hide!" But another, stronger part of me understood. I couldn't leave him alone. Not after that confession that hung in the air between us. What do you want? Jin-ho's voice was cold, but I sensed tension in it. Just to have a quick chat, Lee said, walking over to the fireplace and picking up a photograph of Jin-ho's mother. Remember how she made us that seafood soup? It's a shame she didn't live to see what you've become. Jin-ho didn't flinch, but I felt the muscles in his back tense. Don't touch her. Oh, sorry. Lee replaced the photograph with exaggerated care. Let's get down to business. You give me the northern regions and I'll leave you alone. And? The girl, of course. No, then you'll die together. Romantic, isn't it? At that moment, I noticed a subtle movement from Jin-ho. His fingers curled in a specific pattern, the signal he'd taught me. Distract. My heart pounded somewhere in my throat. God, does he really believe I can do this? You wouldn't just kill us, would you? I said, taking a step out from behind Jin-ho. My voice trembled, but I continued. Because then your people would see you as just a killer, not a leader. Lee turned slowly towards me, his eyes narrowing. The little bird decided to sing. She's right. One of Lee's men, a large Korean with a scar on his cheek, suddenly said, We came to negotiate, not to kill women. Discord. Jin-ho sowed discord with just a hint. Seizing the opportunity, Jin-ho dashed forward. His movements were lightning fast. The first shot rang out before anyone could react. The bullet struck the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, broken only by the light from the fireplace. Chaos ensued. I crouched as Jin-ho had taught me and crawled for cover. Shots ripped through the silence, flashes illuminating distorted faces in the darkness. I saw Jin-ho move between the opponents like a shadow. Fast, deadly, merciless. Sofia! To the basement! He shouted, and for the first time panic was evident in his voice. But Lee Min-ho was already next to me. His hand grabbed my wrist with the force of a steel trap. Where are you going, my dear? I turned and kneed him in the groin, like they taught me in those stupid self-defense classes. He gasped, but didn't let go, only tightened his grip. Mistake, he hissed. At that moment, Jin-ho was there. His face, in the flame's glow, was contorted with a rage I'd never seen before. He didn't fire. Too risky in the dark, with me involved. Instead, he struck me with the butt of his pistol. Lee dodged, pushed me aside, and pulled out a knife. The steel glinted in the firelight. You've always been sentimental, Jin-ho, he said, circling us. Always protecting the weak. That will be your undoing. I crawled to the fireplace and felt for the poker. Heavy, iron. My hands were shaking, but my mind was surprisingly clear. I wasn't helpless. Not after all those lessons. Jin-ho and Lee clashed. Two titans, two former brothers, now mortal enemies. Their moves were honed by years of training, every strike calculated, every block perfect. Run, Sofia, Jin-ho shouted, parrying the attack with his knife. But I could see he was losing. The wound on his arm was making itself felt. His movements were a little slower, a little less precise. And then I realized, I can't run away. I can't leave him to die, even if it costs me my life. I rose to my feet, clutching the poker. Lee Min-ho stood with his back to me, completely focused on Jin-ho. Hey, you bastard, I shouted. He turned around and was struck in the face with a poker. The crunch of bone was terrifyingly loud in the silence that followed the shots. Lee fell to his knees, screaming in pain. His men froze in indecision. Jin-ho seized the opportunity. His gun ended up at Lee's temple. Order your men to retreat, now. But it was too late. Sirens were heard outside. Lots of sirens. Police! Whispered one of Lee's men. The room froze. Even Lee stopped standing, realizing the game had changed. Jin-ho looked at me. His eyes held an indescribable mixture of pride, horror, and... love? No, that couldn't be it. You... he began but didn't finish. Instead, he yanked my arm sharply and pulled me toward the hatch in the floor. Now let's run. We descended into the cold, damp basement. He slammed the hatch behind us, and we found ourselves in complete darkness. Go, his voice was broken. Down this corridor, it will lead to the river. There's a boat there. And you? I'll hold them off, give you time. In the darkness, I felt for his face. My fingers came across something wet and sticky. Blood. You're wounded. It's nothing. Go, Sofia, please. But I didn't move. Instead, I pressed myself against him in the darkness, feeling his heartbeat. Fast, uneven. I won't leave you, I whispered. You said I was your choice. This is mine. Footsteps and shouts were heard from above. They found the hatch. Jin-ho sighed heavily. His hand found mine in the darkness. Then we need to move. Fast. We ran down the narrow corridor, barely seeing each other. The air was stale, smelling of mold and earth. The sounds of pursuit came from behind. The corridor ended at an iron door. Jin-ho pushed it open, and we stepped out onto the river. The cold night air hit our faces. As promised, there was a boat there. We jumped in, Jin-ho started the engine, and we pulled away just as armed men poured out of the tunnel. Shots rang out. Bullets whistled overhead, some landing in the water next to the boat. I crouched down, feeling my fear give way to a strange calm. We were together. We were alive. A few minutes later, we found ourselves safe, hidden by the darkness of the river. The city was left behind, illuminating the sky with an orange glow. Jin-ho turned off the engine, letting the current carry us. His breathing was heavy and ragged. You amazed me," he said finally. His voice was quiet, full of unspoken emotion. "You taught me," I answered just as quietly. He took my hand in the darkness, his fingers cold but strong. "You're really in it now," he whispered. "All the way." We drifted downstream into the unknown, leaving blood and betrayal behind. But one question hung in the night air, heavy and unspoken. What awaited us now that all cards were on the table, and the enemy knew that Jin-ho possessed not just a weakness, but a strength for which he was willing to do anything? The boat drifted slowly downstream, carried by the dark river waters. I sat on the bottom, shivering from the cold and the adrenaline that hadn't yet left my body. Jin-ho steered the motor with one hand, his other hand, the injured one, resting on his knee, and even in the dim starlight, I could see the fabric of his shirt darkening around the wound. We were silent. Words seemed unnecessary, even dangerous, as if any sound could upset the fragile balance established between us after the battle in the house. An hour later, we docked at an abandoned pier hidden by willows. Jin-ho helped me ashore, his fingers cool and confident on my hand. "Where are we?" I asked quietly, looking around. "Nothing familiar." "A few kilometers from the city. There's a place here where we can spend the night." He led me along a barely visible path into the forest. I followed him, tripping over tree roots, my clothes wet from the river and covered in mud. 15 minutes later, we came to a small house, almost a hut hidden among the trees. Inside, it smelled of wood and dust, but also clean. Jin-ho lit a kerosene lamp, and I saw a single room with minimal furniture. A bed, a table, 2 chairs, a small kitchen. "Whose place is this?" I asked as he lit a fire in the fireplace. "Mine," he answered simply. "Nobody knows about it, not even my closest people." The flames flared, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Jin-ho stood and walked toward me. In the firelight, his face looked younger, but even more tired. "Show me your hand," I said. He didn't resist when I helped him take off his bloody shirt. The wound on his forearm was deeper than I thought. The knife had grazed the muscle, leaving a gaping furrow. Blood was still oozing. I found a clean cloth and water in the closet and began to clean the wound. He sat motionless, his gaze fixed on my hands. "You could have died today," he said quietly. "Because of me." "I made my choice," I replied, not looking up from his wound. "You said I was your choice, so you are mine." He took my chin and gently forced me to look at him. A storm of emotions raged in his eyes. Pain, guilt, and something else that made my heart beat faster. "I'll never forgive myself if anything happens to you," he whispered. You've become more than just a witness to me, more than just a duty. You've become..." He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. I saw it in his eyes, felt it in the way his fingers trembled on my skin. "I know," I whispered. "Me too." He pulled me close, and our kiss wasn't tender, but desperate, full of fear for the future and gratitude for the present. That kiss contained all the pain of our worlds, all the danger that surrounded us, and the fragile hope we were trying to grasp. When we finally separated, he pressed my forehead to his. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring," he admitted, his voice broken. "I don't know if I can protect you, but I know I can't let you go." "Then don't let go," I whispered. "We'll find a way." We spent the rest of the night sitting in front of the fireplace, wrapped in the same blanket. He told me about his childhood. Not fragmented memories like before, but whole stories. About learning to swim in the sea in Busan, about how his mother made special cakes for holidays, about how he first fell in love with a classmate. "What happened to that girl?" I asked, resting my head on his shoulder. "Her family moved." He smiled sadly. "Perhaps it was for the best. My path was already predetermined by my father. What would have happened if you had chosen a different path? He thought, looking at the flame. Sometimes I think about it. Maybe I would have become an architect. I've always loved drawing, creating new things. He looked at me. And you? What did you dream about as a child? I laughed. I wanted to be a veterinarian. Then I realized I couldn't stand the sight of animals suffering, so I chose computers. They don't scream in pain when they break. A wise choice, he smiled. And at that moment, he looked so ordinary, so normal. For a few hours, we forgot about the war, the enemies, the danger. We were simply a man and a woman who found each other in the chaos of this world. But reality is inexorable. In the morning, his phone, which he had taken out of its waterproof bag, vibrated. He looked at the screen, and his face became a mask again. News? I asked, already knowing the answer. Lee survived, he said briefly, and he gathered the remains of his forces. He announced a reward for our heads, a very generous one. My heart sank, not from fear for myself, but from what I saw in his eyes, the shadow of defeat. What are we going to do? I asked, standing up. He also stood up, his movements again becoming collected and decisive. We have two options, run or strike first. I don't want to run, I said firmly. I don't want to hide all my life. He nodded as if he had expected this answer. Then we will fight. But to do that, I need to regain control of the organization. Most of my people are still loyal to me, but after yesterday, they might doubt it. What needs to be done? He walked over to the window and looked out through the crack between the shutters. I need to appear before them to show that I'm still strong, that I have not only power, but something more. What exactly? I asked, although I already guessed. He turned to me, and in his eyes burned the same fire that I saw on the night of our first meeting. Cold, dangerous, inexorable. You are my proof. Proof that I have something worth fighting for. Not just power or money, but something that makes me human, not a machine. I walked up to him without taking my eyes off him. Then use me, as evidence, as a weapon, whatever. He shook his head. No, I'll present you as my choice, my partner. The risk is enormous. They might not accept you. They might see you as weak. And you? I asked, touching his face. Do you see weakness in me? His arms wrapped around me, pulling me closer. I see my strength in you, Sofia. And my possible end? We stood like that for a few minutes, then he stepped away and began to get ready. His movements were quick, precise. The boss again, the leader again. There's a meeting this evening, he said, checking his weapons. All the senior commanders will be there. We'll come together. What if it's a trap? Perhaps. He looked at me. Are you ready to take the risk? I looked at this man, dangerous, mysterious, who had become everything to me over the past few weeks. The man who taught me to fight and to feel. I'm already taking risks, I replied. Since the day I stayed with you? He nodded, and in his eyes I saw not only determination, but also something like hope. An hour later, we left the hut. A car, sent by one of his trusted men, was waiting for us. Before getting in, Jin-ho stopped and looked at me. No matter what happens today, know this. When I met you, for the first time in many years, I felt alive. Not just existing, but truly alive. His words warmed me from the inside, but they also frightened me. They sounded like a farewell, like a premonition of something irreversible. We got into the car. The driver, a silent Korean, nodded to Jin-ho and we drove off. Where are we going? I asked quietly. To a meeting that will determine our fate, Jin-ho replied, looking out the window. And it may be the last one in our lives. The car sped along the deserted road, carrying us toward the unknown. And the only thing I knew for sure was that no matter what lay ahead, I wouldn't regret my choice. But the question remained, would we have the strength to pay the price this choice would demand? The car slowly approached the old port warehouse, the location Jin-ho had chosen for the decisive meeting. Through the window, I saw the silhouettes of armed men emerging from the darkness, stationed around the perimeter. Their faces were hidden in shadow, but their postures betrayed a readiness for battle. The driver, a silent Korean named Park, turned to face Jin-ho. Everyone's here, boss, both senior and junior commanders. Lee Min-ho sent his men. They're watching. Jin-ho nodded, his face impassive, but I noticed the muscles in his jaw tensing. Remember, he told me before getting out of the car, never show them fear. In their world, fear equals weakness, and the weak are destroyed. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. You can do this, Sofia. You've been through so much already. You can do this. As we walked out, all eyes turned to us. Dozens of men, of all ages, but with equally stern expressions, looked at me with curiosity, distrust, and some with outright hostility. Jin-ho took my hand and placed it on his forearm, a gesture both protective and demonstrative. This way, he was showing everyone that I was more than just a captive or a bystander, but something more. We entered the warehouse. High ceilings, the smell of fish, dust, and metal. In the center stood a large table, around which sat 7 men, the senior commanders of Jin-ho's organization. Their faces were stony masks, but I sensed the tension radiating from them. One of them, a gray-haired man with a scar across his face, stood up. Jin-ho, you brought an outsider here. That's a violation of our rules. She's not a stranger, Park. Jin-ho's voice was calm but commanding. She's my woman, and she's staying. A murmur swept across the table. Another commander, younger, with predatory features, laughed harshly. Your woman? Since she showed up, we've lost 3 important targets, 6 people killed, and Lee Min-ho has declared full-blown war on us. You're jeopardizing everything because of some... He didn't have time to finish. Jin-ho's movement was so fast I barely had time to notice it. The next moment, he was standing over the commander, pinning him to the table with the cold blade of a knife to his throat. Finish your thought, Kim, Jin-ho said quietly. His voice was more dangerous than any shout. The air in the warehouse froze. No one moved. Everyone froze in anticipation. Kim tried to break free, but the blade only dug deeper into his skin, leaving a thin, bloody line. She will stay, Jin-ho repeated, addressing everyone present. And anyone who dares insult her or question my decision will answer to me personally. He let go of Kim, who crawled back, breathing heavily, pressing his hand to his cut throat. Jin-ho returned to his seat, his movements smooth and confident. He took my hand again, and I felt the trembling in my body gradually subside, replaced by a strange calm. Now that we've got that out of the way, Jin-ho said, let's discuss how we'll destroy Lee Min-ho. The next hour was spent discussing tactics and strategy. I listened silently, watching Jin-ho control the meeting. He was born for this. His ability to read people, anticipate their actions, and impose his will on them was astounding. Suddenly, the door to the warehouse swung open, and one of Park's men entered. Boss, breaking news. Lee Min-ho has raided our weapons depot at the port. He's seized a large shipment. A murmur spread across the table. The commanders' faces expressed alarm and disappointment. It was your leadership that brought us to this, Jin-ho, said the gray-haired Park. Perhaps you should reconsider your priorities. I saw Jin-ho clench his fists. The situation was spiraling out of control. His authority was on the brink. And then I did something I hadn't even thought about a second ago. I stepped forward. This loss is not a failure, but an opportunity, I said loudly and clearly. All eyes turned to me, some with surprise, others with mockery. And how can losing our most precious cargo be an opportunity? Kim asked sarcastically, still clutching the handkerchief to his neck. I looked at Jin-ho, and in his eyes I saw not reproach, but interest. He trusted me. He trusted my intuition. Lee Min-ho acts impulsively, I said, addressing everyone. He strikes at random, trying to prove his strength. But that's his weakness. He's not a strategist like Jin-ho. He's an angry bull. And an angry bull is easily lured into a trap. I walked over to the city map spread out on the table. He's taken over the warehouse here. I pointed to a spot on the map. But to transport the weapons, he needs to use one of 3 routes. And we know which one he'll choose. How can we know that? The other commander chuckled. Because I studied him, I replied. While you were all doubting Jin-ho, I was analyzing Lee Min-ho's every move. He always takes the most direct path, the most obvious. He hates complications. He'll take the embankment. Silence fell. The commanders exchanged glances. Some nodded, others still doubted. The girl's right, the gray-haired Pa said unexpectedly. Lee was always straightforward, too straightforward. Jin-ho came up to me and placed his hand on my shoulder. His touch was warm and firm. "You heard," he said. "We have a plan, and there's a man who helped create it." He looked at me and there was such pride in his gaze that it took my breath away. "Now," his voice became commanding again, "get the men ready. We'll meet Lee Min-ho at the embankment." The commanders began to disperse, giving orders to their men. The warehouse filled with the sounds of the operation being prepared. When we were alone, Jin-ho turned to me. "You..." He shook his head, a smile playing on his lips. "You never cease to amaze me." "You taught me to see the world differently," I replied. "I simply applied your lessons." He pulled me close and kissed me, quickly but passionately. "When this is over," he whispered, "we will have a new life. I promise." But in his eyes, I saw a shadow of doubt, a promise that might be impossible to keep. We walked out into the street where a convoy of vehicles was already preparing. The night was cold, and the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and something else, the scent of impending danger. Before getting into the car, Jin-ho stopped and looked at me. "You'll stay here with Pak? It'll be too dangerous." I shook my head. "No, I'll go with you, until the end." He wanted to object, but he saw the determination in my eyes and simply nodded. We got into the car, and the convoy pulled away. The city streets were deserted, only the occasional flicker of lights from nightclubs. I looked at Jin-ho's profile, illuminated by neon, and thought about how strange life works. Just a few months ago, I'd been an ordinary IT girl, and now I was riding off to war against the Mafia next to the man who had become everything to me. 20 minutes later, we arrived at the embankment. Jin-ho had positioned his men in ambush. The silence was eerie, broken only by the lapping of waves and the distant hoots of ships. And then we saw them, Lee Min-ho's convoy. 3 trucks, escorted by 4 SUVs. They were traveling exactly along the route I'd predicted. Jin-ho looked at me, and there was more than gratitude in his gaze. It was recognition, equality. "Now," he said quietly. At his signal, the attack began. Everything happened so quickly I barely had time to process it. Shots, screams, explosions. Jin-ho's men acted with precision, like a well-oiled machine. I saw Jin-ho directing the operation. His commands were brief and precise. He was in his element, a leader, a warrior, a strategist. Suddenly, I noticed movement to the side. One of Lee Min-ho's men broke through the ambush and aimed a pistol at Jin-ho. I didn't think. I just acted. Grabbing a gun someone had thrown, I did what he'd taught me. Aimed and fired. Once. The bullet hit the attacker's hand, and his weapon fell to the ground. Jin-ho turned, and his eyes met mine. Shock, pride, horror, all mixed in his gaze. The battle ended as quickly as it began. Lee Min-ho's men were disarmed, and the trucks carrying the weapons were captured. When everything had quieted down, Jin-ho came up to me. His face was serious. "Did you kill him?" he asked quietly. I shook my head, still shaking with adrenaline. "No, I hit him in the arm. You said, only if there is no other way out." He looked at me for a few seconds, then nodded slowly. "You were great." Pak approached him. "Boss, Lee Min-ho isn't with the column. He was waiting somewhere else." Jin-ho frowned. "So it was just bait." Suddenly, the sound of cars approaching was heard. Lots of cars. And everyone realized Lee Min-ho had outmaneuvered us. He knew about the ambush and had prepared his own. We were trapped. Jin-ho looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something resembling fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for me. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and then the real hell began. But the most terrifying moment was yet to come. As bullets flew from all sides and we found ourselves pressed against the stone wall of the embankment, Jin-ho suddenly hugged me and whispered something that stopped my heart. "Whatever happens, know that you were the best thing that happened to me in my entire life." And at that moment, I realized he had no plans to survive. He was ready to sacrifice himself to save me. But will he make it in time? And what will happen if he dies, leaving me alone in this cruel world I've only just begun to understand?